Japan, often called the land of the rising sun, is a country that the world knows well for its cutting-edge cities, rich cultural heritage, and breathtaking natural landscapes. Together, these qualities have made it one of the most popular travel destinations on the planet, drawing tens of millions of visitors every single year. What most people don't realize, though, is that Japan's embrace of the outside world is actually a pretty new development in its long history. For more than 2 centuries, stretching from the 1600s all the way through the 1800s, Japan kept its doors completely shut to foreigners, no exceptions. This era, called sakoku, turned out to be a golden age of sorts for the Japanese people. Culture thrived, the economy expanded at a remarkable pace, and society evolved in ways it never had before. That foundation gave rise to many of the timeless cultural landmarks and traditions that Japan is still celebrated for today. So how exactly did this island nation go from being one of the most secluded places on Earth to becoming a thriving, globally connected powerhouse? Let's break it down. The islands that form modern-day Japan have been home to human beings for roughly 40,000 years. The earliest settlers crossed over from the Asian mainland, bringing with them critical skills like farming and metalworking. These abilities set the stage for permanent communities and, eventually, the first organized kingdoms. By the 3rd century AD, a significant chunk of southern Japan had come together under a centralized authority centered in the Yamato region, governed by a hereditary ruler known as the emperor. From the very beginning, Japan's development was heavily shaped by its neighbors on the Asian mainland. Buddhism arrived from Korea in 552 AD. Then, in 645, a sweeping set of administrative changes called the Taika Reforms reshaped the country's political structure, largely borrowing from China's imperial model. The imperial court that ran things didn't have a fixed home for a long time. It moved with each new emperor. That changed in 794, when Emperor Kemu planted the capital firmly in what is now Kyoto, kicking off the Heian period, which would last nearly 4 centuries. Over time, the imperial court got caught up in its own internal drama and lost its grip on the rest of the country. Power drifted away from Kyoto and into the hands of regional nobles and warrior clans, giving rise to a decentralized feudal system. Powerful military families like the Taira and Minamoto grew in strength, their armies of samurai warriors ready to fight for dominance. Things came to a head during the Meiji Rebellion of 1160, a conflict sparked by a dispute over who should sit on the imperial throne. That clash escalated into the Genpei War of 1180 to 1185, which the Minamoto clan ultimately won under their leader Yoritomo. He then set up a separate military government in Kamakura, well away from the emperor in Kyoto. In 1192, Yoritomo secured the title of shogun, essentially great general, from Emperor Go-Toba, making him the real ruler of all Japan. This launched the era of the shogunate, a system of military rule that would define Japan for the next 700 years. The samurai's fighting skills were soon put to a serious test. In the early 13th century, the mighty Mongol Empire set its sights on Japan. In 1265, Kublai Khan sent word demanding Japan's submission as a vassal state. When Japan refused to respond, Khan launched a full-scale invasion. Mongol forces landed on the island of Kyushu in 1274 and ran headfirst into a determined, if badly outnumbered, samurai defense. Just when things looked grim for the Japanese, a massive typhoon, the kamikaze or divine wind, swept through and obliterated the Mongol fleet. The Mongols came back in 1281, and the exact same thing happened. Another typhoon, another catastrophic loss for the invaders. Japan survived, but the war had drained the shogunate's treasury, and many samurai went unpaid for their service. Resentment boiled over, and in 1333 Emperor Go-Daigo seized the opportunity to launch a coup aimed at restoring imperial authority. He succeeded, but only briefly. Just 5 years later, in 1338, he was overthrown in another coup, and the shogun's power was restored under Ashikaga Takauji. Even with the shogunate back in charge, real power in Japan remained scattered among local feudal lords called daimyo, who ruled their own territories and constantly jockeyed for advantage. This often led to outright civil war. The most devastating of these conflicts was the Unin War, which broke out in 1467 over a succession dispute and effectively shattered the feudal system. carving Japan up into a patchwork of competing states. This chaotic stretch of history is known as the Sengoku period, the Warring States era, and it lasted well into the 1500s. It gave rise to iconic figures and innovations in Japanese warfare, including ninja operatives and warrior monks known as Sohei. The whole dynamic shifted in 1543 when a Portuguese trading vessel was blown off course and ended up on the island of Tanegashima, just south of Kyushu. The 3 Portuguese men aboard were the first Europeans to ever set foot on Japanese soil, and they quickly opened up trade connections as part of Portugal's broader Indo-Pacific network. Once a year, the famous Black Ship would arrive loaded with goods, most notably European firearms. Guns were completely new to the Japanese, and the warring daimyo couldn't get their hands on them fast enough. By 1556, more than 300,000 firearms were in use across the country's ongoing civil wars. The Portuguese also brought Christianity, which they used as a tool to strengthen trade ties. New converts were often given preferential access to weapons purchases and sometimes received outright military support. One of the most powerful daimyo to take advantage of European gunpowder technology was Oda Nobunaga. Though he never converted to Christianity himself, he leveraged muskets brilliantly to begin unifying Japan under his rule. In 1582, however, Nobunaga was ambushed and killed before he could finish the job. His successor was Toyotomi Hideyoshi, a man who had started life as a simple peasant and worked his way up through the military ranks to become a daimyo of remarkable skill. Hideyoshi completed the unification of Japan and ruled as de facto leader, though he never claimed the title of shogun, likely because of his humble origins. Instead, he held the titles of imperial regent and chancellor of the realm. Hideyoshi intended to pass power to his young son, Toyotomi Hideyori, and asked his 5 most trusted allies to protect the boy until he came of age. The moment Hideyoshi died in 1598, those alliances collapsed into civil war. One faction backed Hideyori, the other rallied behind Tokugawa Ieyasu, a former ally of Hideyoshi who had his own ambitions. The conflict was settled at the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, where Ieyasu's forces won a decisive victory, paving the way for a new chapter in Japanese history. The Tokugawa Shogunate that followed ruled Japan for an unbroken stretch of 268 years, a remarkable run of stability. This era is also called the Edo period, named after the shogunate's base of operations in Edo, which we know today as Tokyo. It was arguably the most defining era in all of Japanese history. The country finally had peace, and with it came a genuine flourishing of culture, the arts, and the economy. But that peace came with a heavy hand. The Tokugawa government cracked down hard on anything it saw as a threat to social stability. Christianity was outlawed entirely by 1638. To keep foreign influences from creeping in, the third Tokugawa shogun, Iemitsu, introduced the sakoku policy in 1639. Japan's borders were effectively sealed. No outsiders could enter, no Japanese could leave, and no large ocean-going vessels could be built. Limited trade was permitted with China and Korea. Among Europeans, only the Dutch were granted a trading license, and they were restricted to a small artificial island called Dejima in Nagasaki Harbor. For much of the 1600s and into the 1700s, Japan continued to prosper under this arrangement. The population doubled to around 30 million, and the government invested in roads and schools to boost the country's productivity and quality of life. By the late 1700s and into the early 1800s, though, the cracks were starting to show. Agricultural growth had stalled. When devastating famines hit in the 1830s, the shogunate's response was flat-out inadequate. Meanwhile, Dutch books covering the latest European scientific discoveries were quietly making their way into Japan through the trading post at Dejima, gradually planting seeds of Western thought. Japan's isolation came to a sudden and dramatic end in 1853, when a fleet of American warships under Commodore Matthew Perry steamed into Edo Bay. The United States wanted Japan's ports open for international trade, and Perry made it clear that the U.S. was prepared to use military force if necessary. Outgunned and with no good options, the shogunate reluctantly agreed to Perry's terms, opening the country to American commercial interests and eventually to other Western powers like Britain and Russia as well. This capitulation to Western pressure infuriated many Japanese, particularly in the southern provinces of Choshu and Satsuma. These two powerful clans joined forces and in 1868 persuaded the young Emperor Meiji to issue a decree calling for an end to the shogunate. Their armies marched on Edo, triggering the Boshin War, which ended with the shogunate's defeat. The emperor reclaimed supreme authority over the country, and in 1869, the imperial court relocated to Edo, now renamed Tokyo, officially launching the Meiji Restoration. What followed was one of history's most remarkable national transformations. Japan set out to modernize at an astonishing speed, with the goal of standing shoulder to shoulder with the Western powers. Railroads were built, telegraph lines were strung across the country, a universal education system was established, and the ban on Christianity was lifted. Hundreds of foreign advisors were brought in from Western nations to share their expertise in fields ranging from banking and law to mining and transportation. The military was completely overhauled, adopting the latest Western tactics and technology. This newly modernized army was put to the test in 1877 when it crushed the Satsuma Rebellion, an uprising by traditionalist samurai who resented being made obsolete by a modern standing army. With a powerful military in hand, Japan began looking beyond its own borders. After consolidating control over Hokkaido and annexing the Ryukyu Islands, Japan turned its attention to China and Korea. In the First Sino-Japanese War of 1894 to 1895, Japan's forces delivered a stunning defeat to the far larger Qing Chinese military, coming away with Taiwan. In 1902, Japan formalized a military alliance with Britain to counter growing Russian influence in the region. The showdown with Russia came at the Battle of the Yalu River, the first time in decades that an Asian power had beaten a Western one. And the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905 culminated in the Battle of Tsushima, where Japan's navy virtually wiped out the Russian fleet. Riding high on these victories, Japan annexed Korea in 1910, cementing its status as the dominant power in Asia. When World War I broke out, Japan joined the Allied side with an eye toward scooping up German colonial holdings in the South Pacific. Japan came out of the war with favorable terms and secured a seat at the table of international diplomacy through the League of Nations. In the years that followed, however, a rising tide of nationalism and militarism took hold within Japan, especially inside the military. These ambitions led to the Second Sino-Japanese War in 1937, which alarmed the international community and prompted the United States to impose stiff economic sanctions on Japan. As World War II erupted in Europe in 1939, Japan aligned itself with Germany and Italy, further straining relations with the Western powers. Japan also moved into Southeast Asia, encroaching on colonial territories belonging to Britain, the Netherlands, and France. Ultimately, Prime Minister and General Hideki Tojo's government concluded that a preemptive strike against the United States was the only way to break the economic stranglehold and protect Japan's territorial gains. On December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy launched a surprise attack on the American fleet at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. That single act brought the United States roaring into World War II, and what followed was a grueling, years-long conflict across the Pacific. As the war ground on, the U.S. island-hopping campaign steadily advanced toward the Japanese mainland. Facing the prospect of a ground invasion that military planners estimated would result in staggering casualties on both sides, the United States made the decision to deploy a brand new and devastatingly powerful weapon. On August 6 and 9, 1945, atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing well over 100,000 people. Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender on national radio on August 15, 1945. With the war over, Japan came under Allied occupation led by General Douglas MacArthur. The Japanese military was disbanded, and the country underwent a sweeping process of democratization. Emperor Hirohito was allowed to stay on the throne but was required to publicly renounce the divine status that had been central to state ideology. Under Prime Minister Shigeru Yoshida's guidance, Japan made a strategic choice to channel its energy into economic development rather than geopolitical ambition. The results were nothing short of extraordinary. By 1955, Japan's economy had already bounced back to pre-war levels. By 1968, it had grown into the world's second-largest capitalist economy. The decades that followed saw Japan establish itself as a global powerhouse in automobile manufacturing and consumer electronics, fueling an economic boom that sent Japanese-made products into homes across the entire world. All of that post-war achievement has shaped Japan into the remarkable nation it is today, ranking near the top globally in economic output, technological innovation, and even life expectancy. At the heart of it all is the incredible resilience and work ethic of the Japanese people, who chose, after enduring some of history's darkest days, to build something entirely new. A modern, forward-looking nation committed to moving past the divisions and hardships of the past.